When you think of a Japanese business leader, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Is it someone who's all about group harmony, long-term relationships, and this really careful, slow process of building consensus? Yeah, that's the classic image for sure. But how well does that stereotype actually hold up after decades of intense economic pressure? Well, let's dig in and find out.
So it really boils down to this one question. What's the main driver for leaders in Japan right now? Is it still all about keeping the group happy and maintaining that harmony, or has the hustle, the push for performance and hard results, taken over? As we're about to see, the answer is way more interesting than you might think. You see, for the longest time, the common view was simple. Japanese management is all about relationships, period. But the new reality, based on some really cool research, shows it's now a complex balancing act. It's a mix of that traditional focus and a growing demand for getting the task done. So let's break down how we got from one to the other.
Okay, first things first, we have to really unpack that classic stereotype. To get where Japanese leadership is today, you have to understand the image it's evolving from. This is the foundation that everything else is built on. So this classic image, right, it rests on a few key pillars. Group harmony is everything. It's the ultimate goal. And that's supported by building these incredibly strong long-term relationships and a sense of collective, not individual, responsibility. Decisions get made through this famous process called nemawashi, and the whole system was held together by the promise of lifetime employment. So why did this relationship-first approach become so incredibly dominant in the first place? Well, it's not just some business school strategy. It's woven deep into the fabric of Japanese culture itself. Let's look at the concepts behind it. First up, Japan is what anthropologists call a high-context culture. Basically, this means that communication isn't always about the explicit words being said. It relies a ton on shared understanding, nonverbal cues, and what's between the lines. And for that to work, you absolutely need strong, stable relationships where everyone just gets each other. Second is the idea of collectivism. Group identity is incredibly powerful, and it's often based on a shared space or context, a concept they call ba, which you can think of it as a frame or a place. Your ba, whether that's your company or your specific team, creates this really powerful sense of belonging and loyalty. And that brings us to nemawashi. This is how those cultural values are put into practice. It's the informal, behind-the-scenes work of talking to everybody, getting their input, and building agreement before a formal meeting ever takes place. This way, harmony is always preserved, because by the time a decision is officially announced, everyone is already on board. No surprises. But here's the question. What happens when this deep-rooted culture of harmony slams into decades of economic stagnation and fierce global competition? Starting in the 1990s, the economic ground under Japan began to shake, putting all of these traditional practices under enormous pressure. Think about it. Before the 90s, the economy was booming. Lifetime employment and getting paid based on seniority just worked. But then, the bubble burst. The long recession forced companies to rethink absolutely everything. Performance-based pay started to creep in and replace seniority. And get this, by 2009, over a third of the entire workforce was non-regular staff. That is a huge jump from 1991. That old promise of stability, it was fading, fast. And the result of all this was pretty clear. Japanese companies just couldn't afford to prioritize group harmony above everything else anymore. A new, urgent focus on performance, on efficiency, on the bottom line, well, it became a matter of survival. Which brings us right to the heart of our story. A study set out to measure exactly where things stand today. Researchers went out and surveyed 231 working adults across Japan to find out, in this new economic reality, are leaders more focused on relationships or on tasks? The results were pretty fascinating. On average, the relationship score was almost 39, which was significantly higher than the task score of just under 36. So that tells us the traditional focus on relationships is still very much alive and well. But that is not the whole story. Because here's the kicker. That task score of nearly 36 is also considered moderately high. And this is the key takeaway. It's not a simple choice between relationship or task. Modern Japanese leaders are actually balancing both. They haven't thrown out their cultural roots, but they have absolutely adapted to new performance demands. But the study didn't stop there. The researchers sliced up the data by things like gender and age.
And this is where some really interesting patterns start to pop up about who exactly is driving the shift toward a more task-focused style. So when we look at gender, the data shows that male respondents scored noticeably higher on task orientation than their female colleagues did. This might suggest that the pressure to focus on pure performance is felt or even expressed differently between men and women in the Japanese workplace. Now, here's a finding that might actually surprise you. It is not the younger generation that's more task-oriented. Nope. The study found that workers aged 35 and older scored much higher on task orientation than those under 35. Their score was a pretty high 37.12, while younger workers were down at 33.
And what's really important here is that we're not talking about a tiny, insignificant difference. The researchers found it was statistically significant. It seems the generation that really grew up during Japan's tough economic transition, the ones who lived through all those changes, are the ones who most strongly embody this new blend of focusing on tasks and relationships.
Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. What does this tell us about the modern Japanese leader? It's clearly not the old stereotype anymore. It's a new, dynamic profile that's been forged in a changing world.
The big takeaway here is the emergence of what you could call the hybrid leader. This leader is someone who skillfully blends that traditional need to build relationships with the very modern demand for performance. They're constantly doing a balancing act between harmony and results. And as we've seen, this isn't a one-size-fits-all model. It changes based on things like age and gender. It really is a picture of a culture in transition.
The authors of the study really put it perfectly. For anyone who works with or in Japan, this is so crucial to understand. You have to appreciate that the foundation is still built on relationships, but you also have to recognize that the rules of the game are changing, and performance is a huge piece of the puzzle now. And that leaves us with one final, really interesting question for the future. Right now, we see a balance, but it's a moving target. As global competition keeps getting more and more intense, will that pressure cause the scales to tip even further? Will the task eventually outweigh the tradition? Well, only time will tell.